It was the 1996 World Series, and we were primed for Game 1 between the Atlanta Braves and New York Yankees to be played at Yankee Stadium in Bronx, New York. That was the plan, anyway. Hi, I'm Chris May, writer, producer, and host of This Day in Weather History, now in its second year from the Weather Network in Canada. Yes, it's another baseball story, but the World Series is massive. It takes place in October, and when weather causes its delay or cancellation, it's a story that needs to be retold. Like right now, on this day in weather history. Look, October is the month where the one professional sport that is most affected by weather is in the midst of its pinnacle event. Irony, right? Major League Baseball's World Series Classic. Think of it. When you get to the final World Series matchup for the championship, it's later in October and the weather is at its most precarious. The weather was simply too much, and the opener was postponed by heavy rains and high wind from a major storm system affecting the East Coast. It was only the third time in history that a World Series opener had been postponed. As a matter of fact, in the history of the World Series, 9 of the 22 games that have actually been postponed, moved, or canceled in a World Series were scheduled in New York or Brooklyn. That's almost half, and it's split between two teams from the same city. But outside of baseball, this storm was no joke. It was damaging and it was deadly. Highways were flooded. A record just under 4.5 inches of rain fell in Central Park, and some 200,000 homes in New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut lost power. Actually, in New York, the power outages were said to be the worst since Hurricane Gloria in 1985. More than 8 inches of rain fell in parts of New Jersey, and a Delta Airlines jet skidded off a runway at LaGuardia Airport, injuring 5 people and forcing the closure of the airport for nearly 24 hours. Welcome to year 2 of this podcast. Right now, you're listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider, but there's also the daily podcast video short. They're shot right here in my podcast recording studio, so you get that perspective, but oftentimes they will include visuals from that day's event from when it happened in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. In total, sadly, 3 people were killed, and they were killed by falling trees. Now, as far as baseball goes, it is a general acceptance that cool weather helps the pitcher. The air gets denser when it gets colder, and that normally equates to more fly balls that carry less and gives curves just a bit more bite. Also, as a result of the drag and resistance, the fan favorite home run, those numbers drop by almost 20% in games when the temperature is less than 60 degrees Fahrenheit or 15.5 degrees Celsius, compared to all other games, particularly those in the midsummer, turning instant runs into fly ball outs. So, effective pitchers love this, but there is a downside as well. The cool, biting temperature affects those multi-million-dollar pitching hands. Pitchers lose control, and that results in a relatively sharp increase in more walks during colder games. And with the cold and its effects on hands, paired with the increase of fly balls that stay in the park, fielders are a lot busier than normal and also exposed to the same elements. So now we're going to see a sharp related increase in committing more errors. The net result is that there's almost no change at all in the number of total runs scored per 9-inning games. It's just the way that those runs are being scored. So all's well that ends well, I guess. Except for the National League champion Atlanta Braves, who were also defending their 1995 World Series championship. You see, the Yankees defeated the Braves 4-2 to capture their first World Series title since 1978 and their 23rd championship overall. This was also the rise of the late 90s Yankee Dynasty that would go on to win again in 1998, 1999, and 2000. But as for today, this was yet another World Series game that had to be postponed by the rain in NYC, this day in weather history. Hey, do you like the podcast? We'd love to hear from you. If you have an idea, go right now to wherever you're listening to me and rate us if you would, please. It's on a 5-star system, and we would love as many stars as you can afford. So rate us, but then also review us. This way we can always stay on top of how you'd like to see the show evolve. then remember to subscribe to this podcast. Click the subscribe or follow button right there on the very same podcast homepage you're listening on. You'll be immediately reminded that the next day is ready to listen to, and you also have access to every episode in the archives. It dates back to June 1st of 2020, so there is a lot that we got to get caught up on this day in weather history. Tomorrow is October the 20th, and for this one we are going to Cape Breton back in 1974, and a story that was brought to us by a listener and fan of this podcast, Mr. Ken McDonald. He has a story for why Cape Bretoners can be excused for being rather blasé about weather warnings and sometimes what they would call media hype. We're on October 20th of 1974. Cape Breton endured and survived a powerful storm. We'll hear why and what happened tomorrow on This Day in Weather History with me, your host, Chris May.